The metal stapler whizzed past my head and smashed against the wall, leaving a dent in the pale green paint. "My uncle will fire you anyway!" he screamed, his face twisted with rage. His expensive tie hung loose around his neck and sweat beaded on his forehead. I had refused to alter the safety inspection results for the chemical plant. People lived downstream from that facility, and children swam in those waters. The door clicked open. Our biggest client stood there, phone in hand, recording everything. Before I continue this story, if you're finding this as shocking as I did living through it, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more workplace stories that might help you navigate your own professional challenges. Trust me, what happened next changed everything about my career and my life. My name is Rosie, and until 3 months ago, I'd been the most dependable environmental safety analyst at this firm for 7 years. I'd built my reputation on meticulous attention to detail and unwavering ethical standards. My colleagues described me as quietly brilliant, the person who spoke rarely in meetings, but when I did, everyone listened. Then he arrived. Knox, the boss's nephew, strutted into our office on a Monday morning wearing an Italian suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Mr. Baxter, my boss of 7 years, had his arm around Knox's shoulders as he introduced him as our new project manager. He graduated top of his class at Wharton, Baxter boasted, beaming with pride. What he didn't mention was that his 6-year-old nephew had never actually worked a day in his life. I remember watching my coworkers' faces during that introduction. We all wore the same expression, polite smiles masking inner panic. Our department handled environmental compliance for major industrial clients. People's safety depended on our accuracy. This wasn't an internship position where mistakes could be easily corrected. "Rosie will show you the ropes," Baxter announced, catching me off guard. "She knows this department inside out." And just like that, I became Knox's babysitter while maintaining my full workload. The first week wasn't terrible. Knox asked basic questions, took notes, and seemed eager to learn. He even brought me coffee one morning. Black, no sugar, just how I liked it. "I noticed details," he said with a wink. By week 2, the facade began to crack. During a client call about water quality testing procedures, Knox interrupted me to offer improvements to our protocols that would have violated 3 different EPA regulations. After the call, I gently corrected him. "Those standards exist for a reason," I explained. "Changing them would put our client at risk of significant fines." Knox's smile tightened. "Sometimes rules need to be broken to be efficient. My uncle always says business moves faster than regulation." I should have recognized the warning sign. Instead, I nodded and changed the subject. Over the next few weeks, I developed a system. I'd let Knox take the lead on client communications, which he loved, while I quietly reviewed all technical documents before they went out. When he mixed up crucial safety protocols, I fixed them after hours. When he insulted clients with his arrogance, I smoothed things over with careful words and extra attention. My lunch breaks disappeared. My evenings grew longer. My weekends shrank to nothing. But the work got done correctly, and no one got hurt. That was what mattered to me. Then came the Riverwood chemical plant inspection. It was our biggest client and our most complex site. A sprawling facility that produced agricultural chemicals beside the Riverwood, a tributary that fed into drinking water supplies for 3 downstream communities. The quarterly inspection was comprehensive. Soil samples, water quality tests, air quality monitoring, and equipment safety checks. Knox and I spent 2 full days on site. I noticed his impatience growing as we methodically worked through the inspection checklist. "Can't we skip some of this?" he asked as I collected the 15th water sample. "No," I replied simply, labeling the vial. When the results came back 3 days later, I stayed late to review them thoroughly. By midnight, my stomach was in knots. The readings showed dangerous levels of nitrogen compounds and heavy metals, levels that required immediate action and notification to authorities. The source appeared to be deteriorating containment systems that needed major repairs. I drafted a comprehensive report with clear recommendations and left it on my desk to finalize in the morning. But when I arrived the next day, the report was gone. Looking for this, Knox was sitting at my desk, holding my report, a red pen in his other hand. He'd crossed out entire sections and rewritten conclusions. "What are you doing?" I asked, dropping my bag. "Fixing your overreactions." He tossed the marked-up report toward me. "These levels don't require the extreme measures you're suggesting." I picked up the pages, scanning his corrections. He'd halved the contaminant measurements and eliminated all the urgent recommendations. "These aren't overreactions. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. These are accurate readings that exceed safety thresholds. People drink this water, Knox. He sighed dramatically. Nobody's going to get sick from a few chemicals slightly above arbitrary government limits. These limits aren't arbitrary. They're based on decades of research, I countered. And they're not slightly above. They're significantly higher than permitted levels. Knox stood up from my chair and straightened his tie. Look, Riverwood is renewing their contract next month. My uncle specifically mentioned how important this client is to our bottom line. If we submit your report, they'll have to shut down production for weeks and spend millions on repairs. If they don't make those repairs, people could get seriously ill. That's theoretical. The loss of their contract is certain. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. I've already prepared the revised report. Just transfer your data into my template, adjust the numbers to match my conclusions, and we'll submit it today. I stared at the flash drive he was holding out to me. You want me to falsify environmental safety data? I want you to be reasonable, he corrected. Nobody will know. I'll know, I replied. Something changed in his expression then, a hardening, a coldness. Let me be clear, Rosie. My uncle put me in charge of this account. You work for me. Actually, we both work for the public interest and regulatory compliance. Knox laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Is that what you tell yourself to feel important? You're a paper pusher who tests dirt and water. I'm a Baxter. I'll be running this company someday. He dropped the flash drive onto my desk. Have the revised report ready by 3 p.m. I have a dinner reservation tonight, and I need to submit this before I leave. I picked up the flash drive and my original report. I won't do it, Knox. I'm submitting the accurate findings with the appropriate recommendations. You're making a career-limiting move, he warned. I'm doing my job. I turned to walk away when Knox grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. Listen to me, you stubborn. I yanked my arm free. Don't touch me. Then don't walk away when I'm talking to you. His voice rose, drawing attention from colleagues in the open office. You think you're irreplaceable? You're nothing here. My uncle will back me over you any day. This isn't about me or you, I said, keeping my voice low. It's about doing what's right. Right? He scoffed. You know what's right? Loyalty, team playing, not making problems where there aren't any. I held up the original report. These problems exist whether we report them or not. The only difference is whether we're complicit in hiding them. That's when something in Knox snapped. His face flushed dark red, and he lunged for the report in my hand. I stepped back, clutching the papers to my chest. Give me that report, he shouted. No. Knox's eyes darted around his desk until they landed on the stapler. In one swift movement, he grabbed it and hurled it directly at my head. I ducked just in time. The stapler missed me by inches, hitting the wall with a loud crack. My uncle will fire you anyway, Knox screamed, his entire body shaking with rage. The sudden silence that followed was broken by the sound of the door clicking open. There stood Paul, the environmental compliance director from Riverwood Chemical, a look of shock frozen on his face and his phone raised, recording everything. Time seemed to stop. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Paul slowly lowered his phone and said, I came for our 1 o'clock meeting, but it seems I'm interrupting something. Knox's face drained of color. Paul, this isn't… Mr. Paul, I interrupted, straightening up. I was just about to call you about some concerning findings in our latest inspection. Paul's eyes moved from Knox to me, to the stapler on the floor, and back to Knox. I believe I need to speak with Mr. Baxter immediately. What happened over the next 24 hours was a blur of closed-door meetings, hushed conversations, and mounting anxiety. Knox disappeared into his uncle's office for hours. When he emerged, he wouldn't look at anyone. Mr. Baxter called me in next. Rosie, he began, his expression grave. Knox has explained the misunderstanding between you two. Misunderstanding? I repeated. He says you became agitated when he suggested some revisions to your report methodology, that you misinterpreted his feedback as asking you to change data. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sir, he explicitly asked me to falsify readings that showed dangerous contamination levels. When I refused, he threw a stapler at my head. Mr. Paul witnessed it. Baxter's expression hardened. Paul saw the end of a heated exchange. He didn't see the lead-up. Have you reviewed my original report and Knox's revisions? The differences are blatant. I've reviewed both approaches, and while yours is more conservative, Knox's interpretation falls within acceptable parameters for preliminary findings, pending further testing. My mouth dropped open. Further testing would delay addressing a serious contamination issue by weeks. People are drinking that water now. Baxter leaned forward, lowering his voice. Rosie, you've been a valuable employee for years. I respect your dedication, but Knox represents the future leadership of this company, and you've put me in a difficult position. I put you in a difficult position? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. I'm placing you on administrative leave while we conduct an internal review, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. 2 weeks. Paid. When you return, I expect this matter to be behind us. And the Riverwood report? We'll handle it appropriately. I stood up, knees shaking. Will you submit accurate findings? Baxter smiled tightly. We'll submit findings that balance our scientific obligations with client needs. That's what we've always done. But it wasn't what we'd always done. Not until Knox arrived. As I packed my things under the watchful eye of HR, Knox appeared in the doorway of my cubicle. Temporary setback, I heard Baxter whisper to him, patting his shoulder. We'll get past this. Knox shot me a triumphant look, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. The 2 weeks of administrative leave stretched before me like a prison sentence. I'd spent 7 years building my reputation at that firm. My entire professional identity was wrapped up in my work. Without it, who was I? For the first 3 days, I barely left my apartment. I oscillated between rage and disbelief, replaying the stapler incident and Baxter's betrayal over and over in my mind. Sleep evaded me. Food lost its taste. The walls of my small apartment seemed to close in. On the 4th morning, I woke to a text message from Nia, our lab technician, and the closest thing I had to a friend at work. They're going with Knox's report. Thought you should know. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. This wasn't just about my career anymore. Real people would be affected by this decision. With shaking hands, I reached for my laptop and pulled up maps of the communities downstream from the Riverwood plant. 3 towns relied on water from that tributary: Millbrook, Easton Heights, and Pine Creek. Combined population, roughly 17,000 people. What had been an abstract ethical principle suddenly became concrete. These weren't just data points on a graph. They were families, schools, nursing homes. I got dressed, grabbed my car keys, and headed to Millbrook, the closest of the 3 towns. It was a 40-minute drive through rolling countryside that gradually gave way to modest homes with above-ground pools and bicycles in the yards. The local diner seemed like the best place to start. I ordered coffee and struck up a conversation with Vivian, the middle-aged waitress, whose name tag was pinned slightly crooked on her uniform. Just passing through? She asked, refilling my cup without being asked. Actually, I'm interested in the water quality around here, I said. I worked in environmental testing. Vivian's friendly smile faltered. You're not the first to ask about that lately. What do you mean? She glanced around before leaning closer. My grandson gets these rashes. Doctor can't figure it out. 3 other kids in his class have the same thing. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a small boy with angry red patches on his arms and legs. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. How long has this been happening? About 6 months. Getting worse lately. My daughter has to put this special cream on him every night, but it just comes back. Over the next few hours, Vivian introduced me to other locals. A retired teacher mentioned a metallic taste in the tap water. A postal worker described how his white work shirts were developing strange yellow stains when washed. I spent the rest of my first week visiting all 3 downstream communities, collecting stories and documenting what I saw. I took photographs of rashes, stained clothing, and even the strange film that formed on top of standing water in bird baths and pet bowls. Each night, I returned home to research. I found medical studies linking the contaminants I'd identified at Riverwood to precisely these symptoms. I built a presentation mapping illness clusters against water test results. I created a timeline showing how the symptoms emerged shortly after Riverwood had upgraded their production capacity last year. The more I learned, the more my shame grew. Our firm had been conducting quarterly inspections throughout this period. Had we missed the warning signs earlier? Or had previous reports been adjusted before I was assigned to this client? On day 10 of my leave, I received an unexpected call from Paul, the Riverwood compliance director who had witnessed the stapler incident. Miss Adler, this is Paul. My heart leaped to my throat. Mr. Paul, please, let me speak first, he interrupted. I want you to know that Riverwood received the inspection report from your firm yesterday. My stomach sank, and the findings indicated minor areas for improvement, but overall compliance with regulatory standards. Exactly as Knox had wanted. I closed my eyes. fighting back tears of frustration. Miss Adler, are you still there? Yes, I managed. I've worked in environmental compliance for 22 years, Paul continued. I know when a report has been sanitized. What I saw that day in your office, I'm guessing it had to do with the actual findings. I can't discuss. You don't have to, he said, but I need to ask you something. Off the record, completely between us. Are there safety concerns I should be aware of? Not as a Riverwood employee, but as someone whose niece lives in Millbrook. The question hung in the air. My professional ethics battled with my moral obligation. If I told him the truth, I'd be violating confidentiality agreements. If I stayed silent, more people would get sick. Mr. Paul, I would strongly recommend independent testing of the water supply in all downstream communities, I said carefully, particularly for nitrogen compounds and heavy metals. There was a long pause. I see, he finally said. Thank you for your recommendation. Mr. Paul, I ventured, that recording you took, does it still exist? Now it was his turn to choose his words carefully. Company policy required me to submit all documentation of the incident to your firm's leadership. My heart sank further. However, he added, I've been known to back up important files to my personal devices. Old habits. A flicker of hope sparked inside me. One more thing, Miss Adler. Riverwood is hosting its annual stakeholder meeting next Friday. As our compliance firm, Baxter's company will be presenting the safety overview. Just thought you might find that interesting. After we hung up, I sat motionless, turning over Paul's words in my mind. The stakeholder meeting would include Riverwood executives, investors, and likely representatives from regulatory bodies. It would be the perfect forum to expose the truth, if I could find a way in. But first, I needed more ammunition. I spent the weekend reaching out to former classmates who now worked at the Environmental Protection Agency. I couldn't share specific details, but I asked hypothetical questions about whistleblower protections and reporting procedures. By Monday morning, with just 3 days left of my administrative leave, I had compiled everything into a comprehensive presentation. Facts, figures, photographs, and testimonials. The evidence was overwhelming. That's when my phone rang again. It was Mr. Baxter. Rosie, I hope your time off has given you perspective, he said without preamble. It's certainly been educational, I replied. Good, good. He sounded relieved. I'd like you to come in tomorrow instead of Thursday. We need to discuss your role moving forward. My role? Yes. Knox has taken primary responsibility for the Riverwood account, but there's still plenty of important work for you. Behind the scenes, of course. Of course. I was to be demoted to a back office role while Knox took credit for my years of relationship building. I'll be there, I assured him. When I arrived the next morning, the office atmosphere was noticeably tense. Coworkers gave me quick, sympathetic glances before returning to their screens. Nia squeezed my arm as I passed, but didn't speak. Baxter's assistant ushered me directly into his office, where he and Knox waited. Knox lounged in one of the visitor chairs, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I entered. Rosie, thank you for coming in early, Baxter began, gesturing for me to sit. We've been reviewing the team structure and have created a new role we think will be perfect for you. I sat silently, waiting. We'd like you to head up our new data management division, he continued with forced enthusiasm. You'll be responsible for organizing and archiving all our testing results and creating a more streamlined reporting system. A file clerk. He was making me a file clerk. Knox will take over client relations and final report preparation for all major accounts, including Riverwood. Knox finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. And my title? I asked. Senior Data Specialist, Baxter replied. Same pay grade, of course. Of course, I echoed. And if I decline this generous offer? Baxter's smile tightened. I wouldn't recommend that course of action, Rosie. The employment market is challenging right now. The threat was clear. Accept the demotion or be fired. When would this transition take place? I asked. Immediately, Knox interjected. I'm presenting the Riverwood findings at their stakeholder meeting this Friday, and I need access to all your historical data and client notes. Friday, the same meeting Paul had mentioned. I see, I said, careful to keep my expression neutral. And will you be presenting the amended report or the original findings? Knox's eyes flashed with warning. I'll be presenting accurate conclusions that maintain our professional relationship with our client. I nodded slowly, as if considering my options. In reality, my decision had been made days ago. I accept the position, I said. Baxter looked relieved. Knox looked triumphant. Excellent, Baxter said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. Knox will give you the details on what he needs for Friday's presentation. As we left the office, Knox grabbed my arm, just as he had the day of the stapler incident. I need everything on the Riverwood account by end of day, he hissed. And if you've hidden any files or made copies of that original report, hand them over now. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. I have everything at my desk. I'll transfer it all to you today. He released me, apparently satisfied with my surrender. I spent the rest of the day organizing 7 years' worth of Riverwood data, meticulously labeling each file and creating a detailed index. I answered Knox's increasingly demanding questions with calm professionalism. I even offered to help him prepare his presentation for Friday. I think I can handle a simple slide deck, he scoffed. Of course, I agreed. But if you need any specific historical context, just ask. Some of these testing locations have been problematic in the past. He waved me away. Just finish the file transfer. By 5 p.m., Knox had everything he'd asked for. All the official company records of Riverwood's environmental compliance history. What he didn't realize was what I had kept to myself. The knowledge I'd gained during my administrative leave, the photographs of children's rashes, the independent research I'd conducted, and most importantly, my plan for Friday's stakeholder meeting. As I packed up to leave, Nia stopped by my desk. So you're really taking this new role? She whispered. For now, I replied. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Some of us were thinking of going to regulatory authorities about what's happening with Riverwood. I smiled at her, the first genuine smile I'd managed in weeks. Let's see what happens at Friday's stakeholder meeting first. What's happening Friday? She asked, confused. Something unexpected, I promised. That night, I made my final preparations. I charged my laptop and phone, backed up all my files to an external drive, and laid out my most professional outfit. I reviewed my presentation one last time, checking every fact, every figure, every photograph. Then I sent a series of carefully worded emails, the most important being to Paul. Regarding Friday's stakeholder meeting, I wrote, I believe you'll find the presentation most informative. It might be worthwhile to invite community representatives from Millbrook, Easton Heights, and Pine Creek. Just a suggestion. His reply came minutes later. Consider it done. I slept soundly that night for the first time in weeks. The next 2 days passed in a blur of mundane tasks as I settled into my new role. Knox avoided me entirely, busy rehearsing his presentation and basking in Baxter's approval. Neither of them asked why I was so accepting of my demotion. Neither noticed when I requested access to the audiovisual equipment for the conference room to ensure compatibility with our presentation files. By Friday morning, everything was in place. The only variable I couldn't control was my own nerve. As I drove to Riverwood's corporate headquarters, a voice in my head questioned my plan. Was I really prepared to sacrifice my career? What if no one believed me? What if Baxter and Knox somehow turned this against me again? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Those children's rashes wouldn't heal themselves. That contaminated water wouldn't clean itself. Some things mattered more than careers or professional reputations. I pulled into the parking lot and took a deep breath. Today, Knox would learn exactly what happens when you throw a stapler at someone's head. Riverwood's headquarters was a sleek glass and steel structure designed to project an image of environmental consciousness. Rooftop gardens, solar panels, and a lobby filled with living walls of plants created an ironic contrast to what their facility was actually doing to the surrounding communities. I arrived an hour early, carrying a leather portfolio containing my presentation materials. Security checked my ID and directed me to the third-floor conference center where the stakeholder meeting would take place. The room was massive, at least 100 cushioned chairs arranged in neat rows facing a raised platform with a podium. A massive screen dominated the wall behind it. Audiovisual technicians were testing microphones and adjusting lighting. "Can I help you?" one of them asked as I approached the tech booth at the back of the room. I showed my company badge. "I'm with Baxter Environmental. I need to check something with the presentation setup." He nodded and stepped aside, allowing me access to the computer that would control the main display. I inserted my flash drive and quickly verified that my files were loading correctly. "Everything good?" he asked. "Perfect," I confirmed, removing the drive and slipping it back into my pocket. "I'll be back for the presentation." I stepped out to the hallway, just as Knox and Mr. Baxter arrived, deep in conversation. Knox wore a new suit, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed today would cement his ascension. Ah, Rosie, Baxter said, noticing me. I didn't expect you to be here. I wanted to make sure everything was technically prepared for Knox's presentation. I explained. All set. Knox barely acknowledged me. Where should I set up? The tech booth in the back. They're ready for you. As they brushed past me, Baxter leaned in. This is a big day for the firm. I'm glad you're being a team player about all this. I forced a smile. Just doing my part. Over the next half hour, the room began to fill. Riverwood executives in expensive suits claimed the front rows. Behind them sat board members, investors, and regulatory officials. I recognized two EPA representatives I'd seen at industry conferences. I was scanning the crowd for Paul when he appeared at my side. Miss Adler, he greeted me formally, extending his hand. Thank you for your suggestion about community attendees. They're just arriving now. I turned to see a group of people being ushered in through the side entrance. Ordinary citizens in casual clothes who looked distinctly out of place among the corporate crowd. Vivian from the diner was there, along with several parents whose children I'd photographed with rashes. A cluster of elderly residents from Pine Creek followed, including the retired teacher who'd complained about metallic-tasting water. You invited them all, I whispered. You made a compelling suggestion, Paul replied. I also took the liberty of inviting some independent experts. He nodded toward three professional-looking individuals setting up near the back. Environmental scientists who conducted their own tests of the downstream water this week. My heart raced. And? Their findings were concerning. His expression revealed nothing more, but his eyes held mine meaningfully. Where will you be sitting during the presentation? I'll be managing the technical aspects from the booth, I explained. Knox will be delivering the presentation. Paul nodded. I should find my seat. Good luck, Miss Adler. As he walked away, I noticed Knox watching our interaction with narrowed eyes. I gave him a bland smile and headed toward the tech booth at the back of the room. Precisely at 10 a.m., Riverwood's CEO took the podium to welcome everyone and outline the agenda. Various department heads would present updates, followed by financial projections, and concluding with the environmental compliance report from Baxter Environmental. I settled into the tech booth, positioning myself beside the main control computer. Knox hovered nearby, reviewing his notes and occasionally shooting me suspicious glances. Remember, he muttered as the first presenter took the stage, stick to advancing the slides when I signal, nothing else. Of course, I replied. The morning crawled by through tedious presentations on production metrics and market share analysis. I noticed the community members growing restless, checking watches and whispering among themselves. They'd come for one thing only, and it wasn't quarterly earnings reports. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, the CEO returned to the podium. Our final presentation today addresses environmental compliance and safety measures, a top priority for Riverwood Chemical. I'm pleased to introduce Knox Baxter, project manager from Baxter Environmental, who will share the findings from their recent comprehensive inspection. Applause rippled through the room as Knox approached the podium, adjusting his tie with a confident tug. Mr. Baxter, seated in the front row, beamed with pride. Good afternoon, Knox began. It's my privilege to report that Riverwood Chemical continues to maintain exemplary environmental standards that not only meet but exceed regulatory requirements. I loaded his presentation file and advanced to the first slide, a colorful chart showing emissions levels all safely below the acceptable thresholds. The manipulated data looked convincing on the massive screen. As you can see, Knox continued, gesturing toward the display. Our quarterly inspections consistently show all contaminant levels within safe parameters. In fact, we've seen improvement in several key areas. He nodded at me, and I advanced to the next slide, another falsified chart. Riverwood's commitment to environmental stewardship is evident in these results. Water quality tests from the facility's outflow points demonstrate compliance with all applicable standards. From the corner of my eye, I could see the community members shifting uncomfortably. One mother pulled out her phone and showed the screen to her neighbor, likely displaying photos of her child's rashes. Knox was hitting his stride now, his voice growing more confident with each slide. Our comprehensive testing protocols are the gold standard in the industry. We collect samples from 17 strategic locations throughout the facility and surrounding areas. Another nod, another slide advance. The bottom line is simple. Riverwood Chemical poses no environmental risk to surrounding communities or ecosystems. The data speaks for itself. That was my cue. Actually, I said, standing up from the tech booth, I'd like to address that claim. The room fell silent. Knox froze at the podium, his mouth half open. "Who is that?" the Riverwood CEO asked. Paul stood. "That's Rosie Adler, Senior Environmental Analyst from Baxter Environmental, the person who actually conducted the tests Knox is presenting." All eyes turned to me as I walked calmly to the central aisle. "Miss Adler," the CEO said cautiously, "is there something you'd like to add to your colleague's presentation?" "There's something I'd like to correct," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Knox's face flushed deep red. "She's been placed on probation for performance issues. This is completely inappropriate." "That's not true," I countered. "I was placed on administrative leave after refusing to falsify data showing dangerous contamination levels at the Riverwood facility." I turned to the tech booth. "May I?" The technician looked to the CEO, who nodded hesitantly. I connected my flash drive to the computer and pulled up my presentation. The screen changed to show the original, unaltered test results. Stark red bars extending far beyond the safety thresholds. "These are the actual findings from our inspection 3 weeks ago," I explained. "Nitrogen compound levels at 327% above regulatory limits. Heavy metals at 215% above safety thresholds. These contaminants are flowing directly into the Riverwood tributary." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Knox stepped away from the podium, looking frantically toward Mr. Baxter, who had half risen from his seat. I continued. "When I presented these findings to Knox Baxter, he demanded that I alter the data to show compliance. When I refused, he threw a stapler at my head, an incident witnessed and recorded by Mr. Paul." Paul stood again. "I can confirm this account. I have the video." "This is slander," Knox shouted, but his voice cracked. "During my administrative leave, I visited the communities downstream from this facility," I continued, advancing to the next slide. Photographs of children's rashes filled the screen. I found dozens of cases of unexplained skin conditions. The next slide showed maps correlating illness clusters with water flow from the facility. "I invited independent experts to test the water this week," I said, gesturing to the scientists at the back. "Their findings match my original results." One of the scientists stood. "We can confirm dangerously elevated levels of industrial contaminants in all downstream testing locations." "And I invited residents from affected communities to share their experiences," I added, turning to where Vivian and the others sat. Vivian stood, pulling out her phone. "This is my grandson," she said, showing the screen. "His rash started 6 months ago. 3 doctors can't figure it out." One by one, community members stood to share their stories, all matching the symptoms associated with exposure to the chemicals I'd identified. Knox had retreated to the wall, his face ashen. Mr. Baxter sat rigid, staring straight ahead. The Riverwood CEO approached the podium, visibly shaken. "These allegations are extremely serious. We'll need to investigate." "They aren't allegations," I interrupted, placing my original test results, community interviews, and independent confirmation on the podium. "They're facts. Facts that Baxter Environmental attempted to conceal." I turned to face the crowd directly. "I'm providing copies of all documentation to the EPA representatives present today. I've also prepared a remediation plan that could address the contamination issues while minimizing disruption to Riverwood's operations." The CEO studied me for a long moment. "You've prepared a remediation plan?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I've spent 7 years helping companies navigate environmental challenges. I don't want to destroy Riverwood. I want to fix the problem before more people get sick." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. The EPA representatives immediately requested private rooms to begin taking statements. Investors huddled in corners, phones pressed to their ears. Riverwood executives surrounded the CEO, speaking in urgent whispers. Knox had disappeared. Mr. Baxter sat alone, staring at nothing. Paul approached me as I gathered my materials. "That was quite something, Miss Adler." "It was the right thing to do," I said simply. "Yes, it was." He paused. "Riverwood will be seeking new environmental compliance partners after this. When you're ready for that conversation, call me." Within a month, the landscape had completely changed. Riverwood terminated their contract with Baxter Environmental and began implementing the remediation plan I'd developed. The contamination was addressed, and medical assistance programs were established for affected residents. Knox disappeared from the professional scene entirely. Rumors suggested he'd moved overseas to work for a family friend. Mr. Baxter's firm faced multiple investigations and eventually closed its doors. He retired early, his reputation in tatters. As for me, I started my own environmental consultation practice, with Riverwood as my first client. Paul personally oversaw the transition, My team now includes Nia and several former colleagues who left Baxter's sinking ship. We specialize in honest environmental assessment and practical remediation strategies. Sometimes people ask how I found the courage to stand up that day. I simply tell them what I learned from the whole experience. When someone throws a stapler at your head, the best revenge isn't throwing something back. It's making sure the truth can't be buried. If you've ever faced a similar situation where speaking truth to power seemed impossible, remember my story. Like, subscribe, and share in the comments about a time you stood up for what's right, even when it was difficult. Together, we can create workplaces and communities where integrity matters more than connections, and where people's safety comes before profits.